We have some updates here on Super Typhoon Surigae. It looks like the Philippines could get spared by this major typhoon here. Very, very lucky for them. However, they could still see some pretty big impacts here. We'll be discussing that in the video. But without further ado, let's get in the forecast. So here's the latest look here on IR. You can kind of see the eye has kind of died off a little bit. We still have a pretty clear area of very, very little convection. It's kind of the eye we're looking at, but it's a lot smaller than it was yesterday. Obviously, yesterday it got up to 190 miles an hour. However, it has rapidly decreased and only now at it's basically at 144 miles an hour right now. It's at 125 knots and it's at minimal central pressure at 932. So not only has it gone up over 30 millibars since its peak yesterday, but it has really weakened here, thankfully. But this thing got a lot stronger. I mean, it almost got to 200 miles an hour here, but it has rapidly ever so since that peak has basically weakened here, and it's continued to look like it's going to be on a weakening trend here. Very good for portions of the eastern Philippines. However, again, you guys are still going to be impacted by the very outer layer here of the eye wall. You're going to be seeing some pretty gusty winds and as well as some significant rainfall. So definitely still got to prepare, and it's going to be becoming a bit closer as it goes toward these islands here. I'm not exactly sure if you're familiar with those islands or the names here. But basically, the IR showing it really strong eye wall here, very strong layer of convection here, very strong area of very, very gusty winds. So we have a lot of vorticity here. You got that counterclockwise spin going on around the eye, where we've seen that very little pressure. However, that highest, however that lowest central pressure here, but highest. Not only does it have the lowest central pressure, it's got the lowest convection right here. We got a very, very small eye. We can't really look at visible satellite imagery because it is nighttime over there, so you basically can't see anything here, but you can kind of see it's got some nice, it's got a nice structure too. You got still those outer bands kind of stretching and branching off the eye wall here, and then got the eye wall, they got the counterclockwise rotation there, very high amount of vorticity and very strong winds, and that's exactly where we have those category 4 winds over there in the eye wall. It's still a very good structure here. So that's exactly what we have right now in IR. Very good structure. However, it has basically weakened quite a lot. You can kind of see the convection still pretty darn strong. It's got a nice current to it. However, obviously it's a lot weaker than it was when it was at its peak. Its eye has dramatically decreased in size here, but it's still got a decent eye, and it will continue to have a decent eye as it goes up to the north central and then later into the northeast. But again, it is weakening. However, it still will bring in some pretty decent and significant impacts across portions of the eastern Philippines. So here's looking now at the track here. So again, this is kind of where it got to its peak yesterday. Actually, no, this is kind of where it got to its peak yesterday right here. Got up to 155 knots when I made my video yesterday. And then that's 178, and then it got up to 190 here. But right now, again, it is going to be on a weakening trend. At least we hope here. So again, the eye of the storm here, like the actual low pressure, is not going to be I guess anywhere close to the Philippine coast. However, it's still possibly going to bring in the outer band, and maybe the very, very edge of the eye wall, since the eye wall is still pretty large. But as it does weaken, it will minimize an eye wall strength and eye wall size. By the time it actually does get towards areas we're going to be watching kind of right here for the biggest impacts, such as flooding and gusty winds here. By the time we get there, the eye wall most likely will kind of be off the coast here. Thankfully, we do not want this eye wall to be affecting inland areas. However, the question is, could they get Category 1 winds? Could they get a tropical storm wind? That's kind of the question here. Either way, they will be seeing some pretty gusty winds and some minimal damage. The biggest threat, though, will be the flooding and as well the landslides here. We may actually see up to 1 to 2 feet of rain within the next week or so as a result of the storm here. And obviously, it's going to go way up to the northeast here, kind of avoiding those upper areas over there. But there you kind of see, though, it's going to definitely avoid. It's going to spare the Philippines, thankfully. I mean, whoa, they're just missing, they're dodging a bullet, basically. They're basically dodging more than a bullet. They're dodging a whole cannon here, because this is still a massive cyclone here. It's still massive typhoon. It's still at a Category 4 strength right now. It is still going to be at 110 knots, 115 knots by the time it gets very close, or at its closest towards the Philippine coast here. So, I mean, we're still going to be seeing, again, that's still going to be at a pretty decent storm here. It's still going to be basically at a high-end Category 3, low-end Category 4 once it gets toward these areas here. So it's still going to possibly bring in maybe Category 1 gust winds here across the eastern Philippines. And then as it goes up to, now to the north central here into cooler waters, it will gradually weaken out into basically 100 knots, 105 knots. So we're looking at basically a mid and category 3. So it's going to be a major cyclone, or sorry, a major typhoon. This whole path as it skins the regional area of the Philippine waters. Obviously, it won't be a close landfall, but it's still gonna be decently close. I mean, this is probably, I'd say, maybe 100 miles off the coast. So we're thinking, hey, it's gonna be at a category 3, so it's 100 miles off the coast. So it's still gonna bring some pretty significant winds here, and then it'll gradually we get up to 100 or up to 85 knots, and then 80 knots here. So it's still gonna be seeing others to a category 1 once it goes far off the coast here, but it's still gonna be a major typhoon, at least for the next 2 days. At least the next 2 days, it's going to be a major cyclone or major typhoon here, as it does go up the Philippine waters, and it'll gradually weaken into a category 1, and then of course later on it'll be way up there subtropical. So right now, good news, it's going to spare the coast, it's going to spare the Philippines, but still going to bring in some pretty harsh impact. It's going to be staying at a major typhoon for the next 48 hours possibly. Let's go ahead and look now at the GFS some models here. You can kind of see again, they're all highlighted towards being way off the coast here. So we're not looking at a landfall basically. We have a few, one or two getting it towards the far north central Philippines, but again, guys, it's not going to make landfall. So it looks like the GFS is pretty darn accurate with this. Look at the European model. They're still showing it possibly getting a lot. They're actually showing it a lot more to the west than what the GFS is showing here. They have around 5 or 10 making landfall across the north central Philippines. And that's because it's the battle of the high pressure. We have a high pressure to the east. We got a high pressure to the west. And this is going to be push it. This is going to push it to the west. It's going to push it to the east here. So it all depends which high pressure the strongest. If it's high pressure the strongest, it's going to push it towards landfall. So it's all depending here. I mean, there's still a very, very small chance, and there's a small concern that it could make a landfall in far north central Philippines, or there's still a pretty big concern maybe that it can get a lot closer, and that north central turn won't happen until much later, and that'll bring some big extreme impacts across portions of the north central Philippines. We're talking possibly category 2 force winds, and maybe even category 3 gusts, because it still will be a low end category 3, high end category 2 once it gets to the far north central Philippine coast. So still, the question that could it get a lot closer than we're expecting here? Because this high pressure can definitely, very possibly, who knows, maybe beat the high pressure over here. So we got to keep a very close eye on that. But again, in general, very small chance for landfall. And look at the CMC not getting any close. So it's just the European that's getting it very close. And that's why it's so concerned, because the European typically is very, very good with tropics. So we still have to keep a very close eye on it. Could it get closer to the coast than expected? That would be the question later on the road here. But still, right now, no landfall. However, still going to be seeing some pretty big impacts. So let's go ahead and take a look now at the HRRR here, which is basically pretty, or HWRF, whatever. It's a pretty detailed hurricane model. It's specifically meant to look at specific systems here. So if let's say for Surigae, for example, it's going to be exactly for Surigae. So that's why I like to show the HWRF or HRRR. Oh, so not HRRR, HWRF. I don't know why I said HRRR. HWRF. It's the HWRF model. I like to use it because it gets very, very detailed. It's basically like an HRRR, basically, but for tropics. So we're going to be looking at very close detail here on exactly when the heaviest rain can be possibly across the eastern Philippines, and when can it get to its worst here, impact-wise and rainfall-wise, and exactly how, like, when will the storms start to weaken here, and how far off it can be the coast. So the HWRF's pretty it's pretty accurate. Let's just say that. So you see, of course, this eye can be far off the coast, possibly 100, maybe 150 miles, but we're still going to be seeing, like I did say, here's the eye wall right here. This is going to be the eye wall right here. Here's the whole eye wall. So it's a pretty large eye wall. It looks like it's a little bit larger on the western side here, which would be a little bit of a concern because obviously Philippines is to the west. But again, the eye wall most likely will not go over the Philippines. Maybe the very, very slight edge could. But again, we're looking mainly at the outer layer of the system, including, of course, the outer bands here. So we're seeing the heaviest rain, obviously, off the coast here, but still going to be seeing hours of downpours. Again, this is a spiral storm, so it's going to be going over the same areas. The outer bands are going to be going over the same areas for a few hours. So we're going to be seeing some pretty heavy rain again. It is a little bit on the fast this fast moving side. So looks like that's kind of the big side relief. However, we're going to be seeing some pretty significant rainfall across eastern Philippines. The north central portion of the Philippines, you guys will most likely miss out a lot on that rain since it's going to be taking a rapid north central turn to the north. But of course, let's say the Europeans correct and it takes a little bit of a western shift here. That could definitely change a lot. But that's still 36, maybe 40 hours away here. So keeping a very close eye on that. But that's what we have there on the H4. Let's go ahead and look at the winds here that we have for H4. This is going to be the 10-meter wind speed. This is not wind gust. It's just 10-meter wind speed in miles an hour. So you can kind of see we're going to be seeing very gusty, or very, sorry, not gusty winds, very strong winds here. Looking at 153 miles an hour. Or actually, yeah, that's a little bit on the old side. So this is what we're looking at here, 150 miles. So it looks like the H4 is still keeping it on the higher side. Even though it's at 145 miles an hour, they're starting it possibly getting up to 150 here later on the next few hours here. But like I did say, we're going to be seeing some pretty strong winds here across portions of the eastern Philippines, looking at maybe up to possibly 48 miles an hour to maybe 54 or 60 miles an hour. So we're going to be seeing some pretty gusty winds across these areas here. We may have a few scattered areas that can possibly maybe get as high as maybe 60 miles an hour. But of course, if it does take a big north-central turn here, that'll most likely differ here within the models here. So you see the H4 taking a huge north-central turn here. It looks like the high pressure to the west of the Philippines is going to be winning this battle. But that's going to really save the Philippines, not only from a landfall, but from big impacts in general here. But let's go ahead and now look at the pressure here, central pressure. So we're gonna have it really basically at a 921 millibars. So that's the H4. Obviously, right now this is at 932 millibars. So obviously, it's not gonna just drop 10 millibars like that. So the H4 is a little bit on the wrong side here for central pressure, but they do have it getting up to 932, 933 a lot later on, even though that's where it is right now. So look like the Surigae has rapidly weakened more than expected here, like it rapidly strengthened more than expected here. So that's gonna throw off a little bit on the H4R, or sorry, with the H4. And let's go ahead and look at the European, because the European is taking a little bit of a western approach here. So let's go ahead and look at what they're showing. That's gonna be in knots. And you kind of see it's a lot more to the west here, and this north central turn is a little bit less intense here. It's actually going to be, I guess, west northwest here. So instead of going directly north like that, like the H bar or sorry, like the H orf is showing here, it's going west northwest, and that'll bring a lot longer and even harsh impacts across portions of the eastern Philippines and maybe across even north central, the little big island right there in the far northern portion. There you see a little bit more impacts, but you do see we could possibly see gusty winds within now the next few hours across a few islands. Maybe seeing minimal tropical storm winds there, and maybe even possibly 24, maybe even 30 miles an hour across many regions here. So like I just say, the strongest winds will definitely stay off the coast here. The Iowa most likely as well will stay off the coast. You're looking at here 97 knots here, so gonna be getting here at a low in category 3 in the next 6 hours there. And it's going to actually possibly even strengthen just a little bit here once it goes a little bit to the north central. Possibly some warm water there. Going to get up to 107 knots there. And actually, it's going to be a little bit on the weakened trend. So it's going to go as far as 99 knots. And then it's going to get up to 107 knots. So it's getting at a high in category 3. And then it's going to kind of gradually stay at a low in category 3. And then it gradually could even strengthen a little bit more to 113 knots, which will actually get it to a low end category 4. So it's still gonna be a major typhoon as it goes across the Philippines here. So it's gonna be riding the Philippines here still as a major typhoon, which is gonna be a little bit of a concern here. But let's go ahead and look at now the 10-meter wind gusts here in knots, and it's gonna be a little bit of a different story here. So you're gonna be seeing definitely some higher gusts here across portions of the Philippines. As you do see, some areas here can possibly get up to category 1 monarch gusts here, 71 or 72 knots, 76 knots there. So that's going to be obviously at a category 1, obviously there. But as we now go later on here, we're going to be seeing some pretty gusty winds there across the northeastern islands there, possibly maybe 55 miles an hour, possibly even maybe 60 miles an hour. But look at that, we're going to be seeing up to 140 knots gusts here, which is going to be up to actually. That's going to be up to category 5 wind gusts here, possibly, according to the European here. And of course, look at the north central portion of the island could get a little bit harsher impacts if the European is to confirm, because those areas can possibly get low-wing tropical storm wind gusts. Obviously, nothing too major, but a little bit more impacts than if the H warp was going to happen. Of course, that's what we're looking at the big threat for flooding here. We already have up to a foot of rain in the ground or in these areas that have already fallen within the past few hours here, like at least 6 to 18 hours is where we're seeing up to a foot there. And we've seen an addition up to 4, it's possibly even 6 inches of rain here in a matter of just hours here. So going to be some pretty significant rain there, but we're going to be seeing up to possibly 2 feet of rain to drop there in the eye wall. You can see there's very little rain in the eye, so you still see a pretty intense eye. But look at the western quadrants, the western eye wall. It's like to be the more intense here is the northeastern quadrant, but we'll be seeing up to 23 inches there of rain, but I'm possibly see up to around 10 inches there across some portions of northeastern Philippines. So in general, we're looking at some pretty intense rain here. So actually look at the total rain here in the next few days here. And you see we're gonna be seeing scattered areas that can possibly get up to 2 feet across northeastern Philippines, including the north central island there. But here it's gonna be seeing the eye wall gonna be just off the waters of the Philippines, and that's exactly where we possibly see just under 3 feet of rain here, just 0.2 away from 3 feet of rain. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys later.